Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. Darkness Devours the Lost. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Ominous Arrival. Emma tightened her grip on the steering wheel as she drove through the winding mountain road, the mist thickening with each passing mile. The GPS on her phone had lost signal half an hour ago, leaving her to navigate the twisting path on instinct alone. Towering trees lined both sides of the road, their branches interlocking above, casting eerie shadows that danced in the fog. The town of Black Hollow finally emerged from the mist like a ghostly apparition, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of old, weathered buildings clustered around a central square. The few people she saw on the street moved with purpose, their eyes avoiding her as she passed. The weight of their stares lingered, a silent message: outsiders were not welcome here. She parked her car in front of a dilapidated inn, its wooden sign creaking in the cold breeze. As she stepped out, a shiver ran down her spine, though she couldn't tell if it was from the chill in the air or something more sinister. The town felt wrong, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Emma had come to Black Hollow to find her brother, Liam. He had been missing for weeks, his last communication a cryptic voicemail about something he had discovered in the town. He had always been the adventurous one, chasing mysteries no one else believed in, but this time it felt different. This time it felt dangerous. Inside the inn, the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and sharp eyes, handed Emma an old, leather-bound journal. "Found this in his room," she said curtly, her voice low, almost as if she didn't want to be overheard. He left it behind. The journal was worn, the pages yellowed with age. Emma hesitated, then opened it, her heart pounding in her chest. Liam's neat handwriting filled the pages, but it wasn't the words that made her blood run cold. It was the drawings. Twisted shapes, dark figures lurking in the background of sketches, and notes in the margins that became more frantic with each page. As she sat alone in her room that night, reading the journal by the dim light of a single lamp, the air grew thick with tension. Shadows seemed to move on their own, stretching across the walls, and whispers echoed faintly in her ears. She shook her head, dismissing it as her imagination, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. She turned to the last page Liam had written on, her breath hitching as she read the final entry: "Whatever you do, don't stay after dark." The words burned into her mind, a warning that came too late. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Legend. The next morning, the unease from the previous night still clung to Emma as she made her way to the town's small library. Liam's final warning echoed in her mind: "Whatever you do, don't stay after dark." The words haunted her, gnawing at the edges of her sanity. She needed answers, and the library seemed the only place to start. The building was a relic from another era, its once white walls faded to a dull gray. A single bell rang as she pushed open the heavy wooden door, the sound reverberating through the silent space. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom, casting an eerie glow over the rows of ancient books. Behind the counter sat a thin, pale woman with sharp features and eyes that seemed to pierce through Emma. "Help you?" she asked, her voice flat, almost disinterested. "I'm looking for information about the town's history," Emma replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Particularly anything about an artifact called of Shadows." The woman's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Emma thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, the librarian sighed and motioned for Emma to follow her. I'm Winters," she said as they walked deeper into the library. Most of what you're asking about isn't in the regular collections. Too dangerous, too old. Miss E. Winters led Emma to a small, dusty room at the back of the library. It smelled of mildew and forgotten secrets. The librarian pulled out a tattered book from a hidden shelf. "This is all that remains," she said, handing it to Emma. Emma opened the book carefully, her fingers trembling. The pages detailed the history of Black Hollow, a town cursed by the arrival of a dark artifact centuries ago. The Heart of Shadows was no mere legend. It was a malevolent force that devoured the souls of those who sought its power. The more Emma read, the colder the room seemed to become. "The Heart of Shadows consumes all," Miss Winters whispered, her voice suddenly grave. "Your brother, he wasn't the first to go looking for it. But no one who does ever returns the same if they return at all." Emma's skepticism wavered. The rational part of her mind insisted that it was just a story, a myth meant to scare the gullible. But deep down, fear gnawed at her resolve. She couldn't shake the feeling that Liam's disappearance was tied to this cursed artifact. As she closed the book, a quiet voice startled her. "You shouldn't be here." Emma turned to see a young boy standing in the doorway. He couldn't have been older than 10, with pale skin and wide, fearful eyes. "The shadows," he whispered, glancing around nervously. "They have eyes. They see everything." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" "Tommy," the boy said, his voice trembling. "They're watching you too. You need to leave." Before she could ask more, he turned and fled, disappearing into the labyrinth of bookshelves. Emma stood frozen, her mind racing. The Heart of Shadows, the warnings, the unsettling atmosphere, it all felt too real. She glanced at Miss Winters, who simply shook her head. "You're in over your head, dear. Some things are better left buried." But Emma wasn't ready to give up. Liam was out there somewhere, and whatever the Heart of Shadows was, it held the key to finding him. No matter the danger, she had to keep going. The shadows may have had eyes, but she wasn't going to let them stop her. Chapter 3: The First Encounter. The air grew heavier as Emma ventured deeper into the woods, her breath hitching with every step. The ancient trees loomed like sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting into unnatural shapes that seemed to reach out for her. The path beneath her feet was barely visible, swallowed by the dense undergrowth. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made her heart race. Liam had been here. She could feel it, an unshakable certainty that pulled her forward despite the growing sense of dread. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to stretch infinitely. Emma glanced at the sky, now a murky shade of purple, and realized with a pang of fear that she had lost track of time. Night, walling, and the woods were growing darker by the second. She quickened her pace, her flashlight's beam piercing the encroaching gloom. A flash of movement caught her eye, a shadow darting between the trees, too quick to be anything human. Emma froze, her pulse pounding in her ears. She scanned the area, but the forest had fallen into an unnatural silence. The only sound was the rapid thudding of her heart. Suddenly, she stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood an old, abandoned church, its weathered facade barely visible beneath a blanket of creeping vines. The structure was half collapsed, its windows shattered, the wooden door hanging precariously on its hinges. Emma hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to turn back, but she forced herself to move forward. The door creaked ominously as she pushed it open, revealing a dark interior that reeked of decay. The walls were covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the wood and stone. They were unlike anything she had ever seen, jagged and chaotic, as if etched by a hand driven mad. As she stepped inside, A low, guttural chanting echoed through the church, the voices disembodied and distant, yet all around her at once. Emma's flashlight flickered, then went out, plunging her into darkness. Panic surged through her, but before she could react, a cold wind swept through the church, slamming the door shut behind her. The chanting grew louder, filling her ears, and suddenly she felt it, a presence, something unseen but undeniably there, circling her, closing in. She spun around, the darkness pressing in from all sides, her breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, glowing faintly as the air thickened, becoming oppressive, suffocating. And then, without warning, it struck a force that knocked her off her feet, sending her crashing to the floor. Emma scrambled to her feet, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The unseen entity lashed out again, and this time she felt a searing pain across her back as if clawed by something monstrous. She cried out, fear and pain blurring together as she fumbled for the door. With a surge of desperation, she threw herself against it, the old wood groaning under the pressure. Finally, it gave way, and Emma burst out into the night, her vision swimming as she staggered away from the church. The chanting faded, but the sense of being pursued did not. She ran, branches tearing at her clothes, the trees seeming to close in on her, until at last she broke through the tree line and collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. Her body trembled uncontrollably as she lay there, staring up at the night sky. The encounter had shaken her to the core, leaving her doubting everything she thought she knew. But as the initial shock wore off, a grim determination took hold. Whatever had attacked her, whatever haunted these woods, it was connected to Liam. And she wouldn't stop until she uncovered the truth, no matter the cost. Emma pushed herself to her feet, her resolve hardening. The unknown was terrifying, but she had come too far to turn back now. The darkness had come for her, but she wasn't going to let it win. Not yet. Chapter 4. The days blurred together after Emma's harrowing escape from the woods. She barely remembered stumbling back to her room at the inn, her clothes torn and her back stinging from invisible wounds. Now, every time she closed her eyes, the nightmare began anew, a shadowy figure hunting her through an endless, suffocating darkness. The dreams felt so real, the fear so visceral, that when she awoke, drenched in sweat, it took minutes to convince herself she was safe. Except she wasn't. Not really. The nightmares bled into her waking hours, shadowy figures flitting at the edges of her vision, their forms indistinct but terrifyingly familiar. Emma found herself questioning what was real and what was imagined. She'd catch glimpses of Liam in mirrors, in reflections on darkened windows, his face twisted in fear or anger, his eyes empty. Each time, her heart would race with hope, only for it to be dashed when she blinked, and he was gone. Driven by the relentless torment, Emma threw herself deeper into her brother's research, determined to understand why he had been so fixated on the heart of shadows. The more she uncovered, the more disturbing the truth became. Liam hadn't just been investigating the legend. He had been obsessed, convinced that finding the artifact would prove its existence and bring him some sort of dark renown. He had left behind a trail of notes, sketches, and frantic scribbles, all pointing to one conclusion. Liam had been searching for the heart of shadows with the intent of wielding its power. The realization hit Emma like a punch to the gut. Her brother, the person she had always trusted, had willingly courted danger, dragging her into a nightmare that he had created. Betrayal and grief warred within her, but beneath it all was a deeper, more insidious fear that Liam's obsession had led him straight to his doom. And now, she was following in his footsteps. Tommy's warnings grew more frequent, the young boy appearing out of nowhere, his wide eyes filled with terror. "They're watching you," he would whisper, his voice barely audible. "The darkness It's coming for you, just like it came for him. Emma tried to press him for more information, but Tommy would always vanish before she could ask the right questions, leaving her more frustrated and scared. The town itself seemed to conspire against her, the locals' cold stares, their whispered conversations that stopped as soon as she entered a room, the way they refused to answer her questions. It was as if they were all in on some terrible secret, one that they would rather die than reveal. The nights grew longer, the nightmares more intense. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, even when she was alone. Every shadow held a threat, every creak of the floorboards a warning. And then, one night, it happened. She was standing by the window, staring out at the fog-shrouded street below, when she saw him. Liam, standing at the edge of the forest, his figure half hidden in the darkness. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she rushed outside, calling his name. But as she drew closer, something was wrong. The way he moved, stiff and unnatural, his head jerking to the side as if pulled by invisible strings. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned to face her, and Emma's blood ran cold. His eyes were empty voids, his mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "You shouldn't have come here, Emma," he rasped, his voice distorted, inhuman. Before she could scream, the darkness swallowed him whole, leaving Emma standing alone in the silent night, her heart pounding in her chest. She stumbled back to the inn, her mind reeling. Was Liam still alive, or had something far worse taken his place? The line between reality and madness had blurred, and Emma was teetering on the edge. But there was no turning back. Whatever had happened to Liam, whatever the Heart of Shadows truly was, she was in too deep now. The darkness had taken her brother, and it was coming for her next. Chapter 5: The Heart of Shadows. Emma's breath came in shallow gasps as she stood before the entrance to the underground cavern. The old, rusted gate that barred her way groaned as she forced it open, the sound echoing ominously through the tunnel ahead. A deep sense of foreboding settled over her, but she pressed on, driven by the relentless need to uncover the truth to find Liam, or at least what was left of him. The air grew colder the deeper she went, the oppressive darkness pressing in on all sides. Her flashlight's beams struggled to penetrate the thick shadows, casting eerie, flickering shapes on the walls. The cavern felt alive, the very stones seeming to pulse with a malevolent energy that set her teeth on edge. Each step was a battle against the rising tide of fear that threatened to paralyze her. But Emma forced herself forward, clutching Liam's journal like a lifeline. The passageway narrowed, forcing her to squeeze through jagged rock formations that tore at her clothes and skin. Her heart pounded as she descended further, the temperature dropping until her breath came out in visible puffs of mist. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint dripping of water somewhere in the distance, each drop echoing like a death knell. As she turned a corner, the tunnel widened into a vast chamber, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, depicting twisted, inhuman figures performing dark rituals. Piles of bones, some human, some not, littered the ground, remnants of sacrifices long forgotten. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and something far worse, an unnatural wrongness that made her stomach churn. In the center of the chamber, the floor sloped down into a pit, its depths hidden by a swirling black mist. Emma hesitated at the edge, her heart racing. This was it, the place Liam had been searching for, the resting place of the Heart of Shadows. She forced herself to descend into the pit, the darkness closing in around her like a shroud. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as if the cavern itself was trying to swallow her whole. And then she saw a faint, pulsating light at the bottom, emanating from a massive black crystal embedded in the rock. The Heart of Shadows. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, a solid, jagged mass of pure darkness that seemed to absorb all light around it. As she approached, she could feel it whispers in the back of her mind, faint but insistent, like a chorus of lost souls crying out from the abyss. Closer she got, the louder they became, whispering her deepest fears, her darkest regrets. They taunted her, reminding her of Liam's betrayal, of her failure to save him. Her hand trembled as she reached out, drawn by a force she couldn't understand, couldn't resist. And then she saw it, Liam's journal, lying just beneath the crystal, open to a final entry scrawled in a hand that was no longer his own. "It's too late for me. Don't let it take you too. Run, Emma, before you become one of us." The words chilled her to the bone, but still she couldn't pull away. The crystal pulsed with a dark rhythm, its energy wrapping around her like a cold embrace. The darkness within it was alive, sentient, feeding on her fear, her despair. Suddenly, the whispers became a roar, drowning out all reason. The walls of the cavern seemed to close in. Emma staggered back, the weight of the darkness crushing her, suffocating her. But even as terror gripped her, something deeper stirred, a spark of determination. She had come this far. She wouldn't let the darkness take her, not without a fight. Summoning every ounce of strength, she tore herself away from the crystal, its whispers clawing at her mind, trying to pull her back. With a final, desperate effort, she turned and fled, the darkness howling in fury behind her. She didn't stop running until she was out of the pit, out of the cavern, the screams of the lost souls still ringing in her ears. The heart of shadows had shown her its true face, and she knew now what she was up against. But she also knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't stop until she destroyed it, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Chapter 6: The Darkness Unleashed. Emma's heart thundered in her chest as she stumbled out of the pit, the echoes of the cavern's whispers still gnawing at her mind. Her hands shook as she clutched Liam's journal to her chest, the final entry etched into her memory like a curse. But there was no time to dwell on it. She had to destroy the heart of shadows before it consumed her, before it consumed the world. She ran back toward the crystal, driven by a desperate hope that she could end this nightmare. But as she approached, she felt the darkness within it stir, as if sensing her intent. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and she could feel the malevolent presence lurking just beyond the edge of the light. With a cry of defiance, Emma raised the heavy iron rod she had found earlier, her eyes locked on the crystal's pulsing core. She swung with all her might, the force of the blow sending shockwaves through her arms. The crystal cracked, a deep splintering sound that reverberated through the chamber. For a moment, she thought she had succeeded. But then the darkness erupted. It poured out of the crystal like black smoke, twisting and writhing as it spread through the cavern. The air grew thick with a cold, suffocating fog, and Emma's breath caught in her throat as the shadows began to take shape, twisted, malevolent beings with hollow eyes and gaping mouths that dripped with malice. They moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, their forms constantly shifting, as if struggling to maintain a physical presence in the world. Emma stumbled back, her mind screaming at her to run, but her legs felt like lead. The darkness swarmed around her, the beings closing in with a hunger that chilled her to the bone. She swung the iron rod wildly, trying to keep them at bay, but it was like fighting smoke. Every time she struck, they dissolved into shadow, only to reform seconds later, closer, more terrifying. She turned and fled, the cavern collapsing around her as the darkness consumed everything in its path. The walls crumbled, the ground buckled, and Emma barely managed to stay on her feet as she ran through the tunnels, the shadowy entities in relentless pursuit. Her lungs burned, her muscles ached, But she couldn't stop, not now. Not when everything was on the line. Bursting out of the tunnel into the open air, Emma skidded to a halt. The town lay before her, but it was unrecognizable. The mist that had always clung to the town had thickened into a choking fog, and the darkness was spreading through the streets, swallowing buildings and people alike. Screams echoed in the distance, the sounds of chaos and terror as the townsfolk were engulfed by the shadows. Emma's breath hitched as she realized what she had done. She had unleashed the very thing Liam had warned her about, the darkness that now sought to consume everything in its path. But there was no time for regret, no time to mourn. She had to find a way to contain it, to stop the darkness before it devoured the town, before it spread beyond the mountains. She ran through the streets, dodging the shadowy beings that lunged at her from every corner. The once familiar town was now a twisted labyrinth of darkness and fear, and every turn brought her closer to the edge of despair. But Emma forced herself to keep moving, her mind racing as she tried to think of a way out, a way to stop the spreading evil. As she navigated the collapsing town, the transformation within her was complete. The determined investigator who had come to find her brother was gone, replaced by a desperate survivor, willing to sacrifice anything and everything to stop the darkness she had unleashed. The shadows were relentless, their whispers now a deafening roar in her mind, but Emma fought back with every ounce of strength she had left. With the town crumbling around her, Emma knew she had one last chance. She had to find the source, the very heart of the darkness, and destroy it, even if it meant sacrificing herself. The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking. The shadows closed in, and Emma ran toward her final confrontation, knowing that this battle would decide not just her fate, but the fate of everyone she had ever known. Chapter 7. The Final Revelation. Emma burst into the town hall, her breath ragged and her eyes wild with desperation. The shadows had swallowed the streets, leaving only fractured pockets of light and chaos. The air was thick with the stench of decay and fear. She could feel the darkness closing in around her, a tangible presence that gnawed at her resolve. But she had one goal: to find the heart of the darkness and end this nightmare. The town hall, once a symbol of authority, was now a twisted, foreboding structure. Its grandiose facade had become a grotesque monument to the town's hidden sins. Inside, Emma found herself in a vast chamber, illuminated by flickering torches that cast eerie shadows on the walls. The room was filled with the town's elite, the families who had ruled the town for generations, their faces masked with a cold, distant arrogance. As she stepped further in, the realization hit her. They had been waiting for her. The chamber was filled with the murmurs of the powerful, their voices a blend of condescension and fear. At their center was a raised platform where an ornate, iron-bound chest lay the heart of shadows, encased in a protective barrier. "Welcome, Emma," said a tall man with a grim face, his eyes cold and calculating. "We've been expecting you." Emma's anger flared. "You've been hiding this all along. You've been using it to maintain your power." The man's expression remained unchanged. "The heart of shadows is no mere artifact. It is a necessary evil kept in check by our rituals. The darkness must be contained, or it will consume everything." Emma's heart sank as she listened. Town's elite revealed the truth in cold, detached tones. The heart was never meant to be destroyed. It was a force they had controlled for generations, a dark power they had used to keep their grip on the town. Liam hadn't simply disappeared. He had been offered as a sacrifice to appease the darkness, to keep it from escaping and wreaking havoc. The revelation was a crushing blow. Emma's grief turned to fury. as she realized the full extent of the betrayal. Her brother's death had been nothing more than a cruel ritual, a means to an end for those who valued power over human lives. "Why should I help you?" Emma demanded, her voice trembling with rage. "Why should I care about preserving your power?" "'Cause if you don't," the man replied, "the darkness will spread beyond these mountains. It will consume everything." Emma was faced with an impossible choice: sacrifice herself to reseal the darkness, or find another way to stop it without losing her soul. The moral and emotional stakes had never been higher. The shadows around her grew more aggressive, their whispers becoming a cacophony of torment. The decision was agonizing. The idea of sacrificing herself was terrifying, yet the thought of allowing the darkness to spread was unbearable. Emma knew that whatever choice she made would seal her fate and the fate of everyone around her. In the midst of the turmoil, Emma's resolve hardened. The themes of power, sacrifice, and the consequences of seeking knowledge beyond human understanding loomed large. She had come this far and faced unimaginable horrors, but now she had to confront the ultimate challenge. As she faced the elite, her heart pounding with a mix of terror and determination, Emma knew one thing: she would not allow her brother's death to be in vain. Whatever the cost, she would find a way to stop the darkness and free the town from its malevolent grip. The final confrontation awaited, and the choices she made now would determine the fate of everything she held dear. Chapter 8: The Darkness Devours. Emma stood before the heart of shadows, the weight of her decision crushing her. The town's elite had retreated, leaving her alone in the grand, desolate chamber. The shadows around her writhed and twisted, their forms an ever-present reminder of the power she was about to confront. The chamber felt like a living entity, pulsing with the dark energy that had consumed so much already. In a last, desperate measure, Emma had managed to decipher an ancient ritual from Liam's journal, a way to trap the darkness, but one that required a sacrifice of immense personal cost. She'd gathered the necessary components: salt, iron, and symbols of containment. The ritual would bind the darkness to the heart, imprisoning it in a state of unending torment. It was her only chance to save what remained of the town and the world beyond. Her hands trembled as she began the incantation, her voice echoing through the chamber. The ritual was intricate, each word and symbol a piece of a complex puzzle designed to hold the darkness at bay. The shadows roared, a cacophony of rage and despair, as they surged toward her, drawn by the ritual's power. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but she pressed on, each word a battle against the encroaching void. The air grew colder, and a blinding light erupted from the heart of shadows as the ritual took effect. The darkness swirled around the chamber, a maelstrom of malevolent energy trying to break free. Emma could feel its icy tendrils reaching for her, whispering promises of power and escape. But she fought through the fear, her voice rising in defiant resolve. With a final, shuddering cry, she completed the incantation. The light from the heart intensified, engulfing the chamber in a blinding glow. The shadows writhed and shrieked, their forms dissolving into the light as they were pulled into the heart's dark core. The chamber trembled, the very foundations of the town quaking with the force of the ritual. When the light faded, Emma collapsed, exhausted and battered. The town lay in ruins, a ghostly silence settling over the wreckage. The few survivors who emerged from the shadows were haunted, their eyes reflecting the horrors they had witnessed. The town would never be the same. As Emma staggered toward the exit, the fog outside seemed thicker, the darkness more palpable. She glanced back one last time at the wreckage of the town, a heavy sadness weighing on her. The darkness had been trapped, but the cost was immense. The town was a shell of what it once was, and the survivors would carry the scars of this night forever. With a final, weary breath, Emma walked into the foggy distance. The road ahead was uncertain, her future shrouded in the same murky fog that now enveloped the town. The darkness had been contained, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that it might still linger, waiting in the shadows for the next lost soul to claim. As she disappeared into the fog, the novel closed on a haunting note. Emma's journey had changed her forever. She had confronted the darkest aspects of humanity and the unknown, but at what cost? The reader is left with a sense of dread and contemplation, pondering the nature of darkness and the price of being truly lost.